What's the knock-on effect on hydration levels? Obviously, as temperature rises, sweat rate's going to rise. As you said, the composition of that sweat might change. And actually, something really interesting I learned speaking with Dr. Alan Lim, physiologist who worked with Team Garmin for years, which I never knew, that sweat rate and thirst there's a strange interplay between them, because if you drink a drink that has too high of a concentration of electrolytes and salts, so you'll drink that and your body will turn off the thirst signal when it's got 100% of its electrolyte needs. But because it's got 100% of electrolyte needs doesn't mean it's got 100% of its water needs. So the thirst signal is switched off purely because you've drank enough electrolytes, but you still need extra water. And then the converse of that as well, if there's not enough electrolytes in it, you'll drink water and your thirst signal will be switched off because you've met the water needs, but you actually haven't met your salt needs. So you're underperforming in both cases. So hydration's vastly more complicated than I ever understood. And I'm just contemplating me using this device now and saying, am I going to dig myself into an even further hole here because I don't understand the changing sweat rates of exposing myself to heat training?
It's a real problem. I think the way I look at it is two slightly separate challenges, right? There's an entire work stream, there's separate devices, there's entire labs dedicated to the sweat science. And I agree with you. It's rather complex and I'm constantly fascinated by it. In fact, we actually work with quite a few of them because there's obviously an interplay between your core temp and maybe your sweat data, but they are slightly separate in the sense of you don't actually need to fully understand the sweat component to get the benefit. I think you brought this up. I had the same experience. I was a pro triathlete, certainly not anything of note, but good enough. And I had a day job while I was doing it. But I was doing kind of the same thing and banging away on the trainer indoors, sweating profusely, still hitting my power numbers. And what I was noticing personally, this is my own experience, is I would actually sweat less at those same power numbers that I was being prescribed by my coach because my body was adapting. And, from my looking back at that, I was able to keep my core temp lower at the same power number. So, yeah, that's what I was seeing. Could I have pushed maybe further then? Would that have been more beneficial? I don't know. That's the science. I'm not a sports scientist, but it's really interesting. That's what I noticed, though. Is like
that is the interesting part. Is it's like you got your adaptation. If we change the stimulus now, will you get another step up on the adaptation ladder?
Maybe I had peaked. Maybe I hadn't, and that's I think what's super cool is like if I had some of this data, maybe I would have kept pushing or done more.
You could have been like Jan Frodeno.
Yeah, right. The difference I will say is, heat adaptation is similar to altitude in a lot of ways. And one is the general sort of, okay, if you increase your plasma volume, generally what happens is the red blood cells fill in. So the research sort of shows that it's a somewhat similar thing. It's not done in the same way. It's not just raw red blood cells right away. The other similarity is, I would say the amount of time it generally takes. It's usually roughly about the same time to get adapted. And then the third similarity is there's a max, right? Like if you spend your whole life at altitude, it doesn't necessarily get much better. So, you do an altitude camp and you kind of hit a certain level and then that's it. And it's sort of the same on the thermal side from what we've seen is, at least in the shorter term studies and things we look at, like once you've adapted, you've adapted. And then you can go into maintenance mode and focus maybe on other ways to optimize your performance. And certainly making sure that you don't lose it is important. Once you've done the work and you can maintain it more easily. And that's really interesting. And then the fourth thing I would mention and final one is a difference. The big difference, though, is most of us can't do 2 weeks in Tenerife or whatever. It's a lot easier to get on the Zwift machine in the basement and crank up the temperature than it is to go on a 2 week holiday for most athletes. And that's a big difference here.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please click up here. There's another video I know that you're absolutely going to love. Click over here and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our amazing upcoming guests.